Hi, fourth graders. We are in for a real big treat today because we're starting one of my all-time favorite books in the world, Number the Stars. As we've discussed already, this book is about a young girl named Anne-Marie and her best friend Ellen, and it takes place in 1943 Denmark during a very crazy time in European history during the Nazi occupation of Denmark. Okay, today we're going to be listening to chapters 1 through 4. And as I'm reading, I just want you guys to be thinking about if you come across any signposts. Are there any CC moments, contrasts and contradictions? Do any of the characters act or behave or say something that is different than what you would have expected once you start to get to know them? Are there any memory moments? Is there any words of the wiser when perhaps an older friend or family member is giving advice? I'm having trouble remembering all the other signposts for now, but I will type them up and send them to you. Okay, chapter 1 is called Why Are You Running? I'll race you to the corner, Ellen. Anne-Marie adjusted the thick leather pack on her back so that her school books balanced evenly. Ready? She looked at her best friend. Ellen made a face. No, she said, laughing. You know I can't beat you. My legs aren't as long. Can't we just walk like civilized people? She was a stocky 10-year-old, unlike lanky Anne-Marie. We have to practice for the athletic meet on Friday. I know I'm going to win the girls' race this week. I was second last week, but I've been practicing every day. Come on, Ellen. Anne-Marie pleaded, eyeing the distance to the next corner of the Copenhagen street. Please? Ellen hesitated, then nodded and shifted her own russack of books against her shoulders. Oh, all right, she said. Ready, she said. Go! Shouted Anne-Marie, and the two girls were off, racing along the residential sidewalk. Anne-Marie's silvery blonde hair flew behind her, and Ellen's dark pigtails bounced against her shoulders. Wait for me! Wailed little Christy, left behind, but the two older girls weren't listening. Anne-Marie outdistanced her friend quickly, even though one of her shoes came untied as she sped along the street called Osterbrogade, past the small shops and cafes of her neighborhood here in the northeast of Copenhagen. Laughing, she skirted an elderly lady in black who carried a shopping bag made of string. A young woman pushing a baby in a carriage moved aside to make way. The corner was just ahead. Anne-Marie looked up, panting, just as she reached the corner. Her laughter stopped. Her heart seemed to skip a beat. Halt! The soldier ordered in a stern voice. The German word was as familiar as it was frightening. Anne-Marie had heard it often enough before, but it had never been directed at her until now. Behind her, Ellen also slowed and stopped. Far back, little Christy was plodding along, her face in a pout because the girls hadn't waited for her. Anne-Marie stared up. There were two of them. That meant 2 helmets, 2 sets of cold eyes glaring at her, and 4 shiny boots planted firmly on the sidewalk, blocking her path to home. And it meant 2 rifles gripped in the hands of the soldiers. She stared at the rifles first. Then finally, she looked into the face of the soldier who had ordered her to halt. Why are you running? The harsh voice asked. His Danish was very poor. 3 years, Anne-Marie thought with contempt. 3 years since they've been in our country, and still they can't speak our language. I was racing with my friend, she answered politely. We have races at school every Friday, and I wanted to do well, so I... Her voice trailed away, the sentence unfinished. Don't talk so much, she told herself. Just answer them, that's all. She glanced back. Ellen was motionless on the sidewalk, a few yards behind her. Farther back, Kirsty was still sulking and walking slowly toward the corner. Nearby, a woman who had come to the doorway of the shop was standing silently watching. One of the soldiers, the taller one, moved toward her. Anne-Marie recognized him as the one she and Ellen had always called in whispers the giraffe, because of his height and the long neck that extended from his stiff collar. He and his partner were always on this corner. He prodded the corner of her backpack with the stock of his rifle. Anne-Marie trembled. What is in here? He asked loudly. From the corner of her eye, she saw the shopkeeper move quietly back into the shadows of the doorway and out of sight. "School books," she answered truthfully. "Are you a good student?" the soldier asked. He seemed to be sneering. "Yes. What is your name?" "Anne-Marie Johansson." "Your friend, is she a good student too?" He was looking beyond her at Ellen, who hadn't moved. Anne-Marie looked back too and saw that Ellen's face, usually rosy-cheeked, was pale and her dark eyes were wide. She nodded at the soldier. "Better than me," she said. "What is her name?" "Ellen." "And who is this?" he asked, looking to Anne-Marie's side. Christy had appeared there suddenly, scowling at everyone. "My little sister." She reached down for Christy's hand, but Christy, always stubborn, refused it and put her hands on her hips defiantly. The soldiers reached down and stroked her little sister's short, tangled curls. "Stand still, Christy," Anne-Marie ordered silently, praying that somehow the obstinate 5-year-old would receive the message. But Christy reached up and pushed the soldier's hand away. "Don't!" she said loudly. Both soldiers began to laugh. They spoke to each other in rapid German so that Anne-Marie couldn't understand. "She is pretty, like my own little girl," the tall one said in a more pleasant voice. Anne-Marie tried to smile politely. "Go home, all of you. Go study your school books and don't run. You look like hoodlums when you run." The two soldiers turned away. Quickly, Anne-Marie reached down again and grabbed her sister's hand before Christy could resist. Hurrying the little girl along, she rounded the corner. In a moment, Ellen was beside her. They walked quickly, not speaking, with Christy between them toward the large apartment building where both families lived. When they were almost home, Ellen whispered suddenly, "I was so scared." "Me too," Anne-Marie whispered back. As they turned to enter their building, both girls looked straight ahead toward the door. They did it purposefully, so that they would not catch the eyes or the attention of 2 more soldiers, who stood with their guns on this corner as well. Christy scurried ahead of them through the door, chattering about the picture she was bringing home from kindergarten to show Mama. For Christy, the soldiers were simply part of the landscape, something that had always been there, on every corner, as unimportant as lampposts throughout her remembered life. "Are you going to tell your mother?" Ellen asked Anne-Marie as they trudged together up the stairs. "I'm not. My mother would be upset." "No, I won't either. Mama would probably scold me for running in the street." She said goodbye to Ellen on the 2nd floor, where Ellen lived, and continued on the 3rd, practicing in her mind a cheerful greeting for her mother, a smile, a description of today's spelling test, in which she had done well. But she was too late. Christy had gotten there first. "And he poked Anne-Marie's book bag with his gun, and then he grabbed my hair." Christy was chattering as she took off her sweater in the corner of the apartment living room. "But I wasn't scared. Anne-Marie was, and Ellen too, but not me." Mrs. Johansson rose quickly from the chair by the window where she'd been sitting. Mrs. Rosen, Ellen's mother, was there too, in the opposite chair. They'd been having coffee together, as they did many afternoons. Of course, it wasn't really coffee, though the mothers still called it that, having coffee. There had been no real coffee in Copenhagen since the beginning of the Nazi occupation, not even real tea. The mothers sipped at hot water flavored with herbs. "Anne-Marie, what happened? What is Christy talking about?" her mother asked anxiously. "Where's Ellen?" Mrs. Rosen had a frightened look. "Ellen's in your apartment. She didn't realize you were here," Anne-Marie explained. "Don't worry, it wasn't anything. It was the 2 soldiers who stand on the corner of Osterbrigade. You've seen them. You know, the tall one with the long neck and the one who looks like a silly giraffe." She told her mother and Mrs. Rosen of the incident, trying to make it sound humorous and unimportant, but their uneasy looks didn't change. "I slapped his hand and shouted at him," Christy announced importantly. "No, she didn't, Mama," Anne-Marie reassured her mother. "She's exaggerating, as she always does." Mrs. Rosen moved to the window and looked down to the street below. The Copenhagen neighborhood was quiet. It looked the same as always, people coming and going from the shops, children at play, the soldiers on the corner. She spoke in a low voice to Ellen's mother. "They must be edgy because of the latest resistance incident. Did you read in De Freedankse? Sorry, I don't speak Danish. About the bombings in Hilderod and Nørrebro?" Although she pretended to be absorbed in unpacking her school books, Anne-Marie listened, and she knew what her mother was referring to. De Free Danks, the Free Danes, was an illegal newspaper. Peter Nielsen brought it to them occasionally, carefully folded and hidden among ordinary books and papers, and Mama always burned it after she and Papa had read it. But Anne-Marie heard Mama and Papa talk, sometimes at night, about the news they received that way. News of sabotage against the Nazis, bombs hidden and exploded in the factories that produced war materials, and industrial railroad lines damaged so that goods couldn't be transported. And she knew what resistance meant. Papa had explained when she overheard the word and asked. The resistance fighters were Danish people. No one knew who, because they were very secret, who were determined to bring harm to the Nazis however they could. They damaged the German trucks and cars and bombed their factories. They were very brave. Sometimes they were caught and killed. I must go and speak to Ellen, Mrs. Rosen said, moving toward the door. You girls walk a different way to school tomorrow. Promise me, Anne-Marie, and Ellen will promise too. We will, Mrs. Rosen, but why does it matter? There are German soldiers on every corner. They will remember your faces, Mrs. Rosen said, turning in the doorway to the hall. It is important to be one of the crowd, always. Be one of many. Be sure that they never have a reason to remember your face. She disappeared into the hall and closed the door behind her. He'll remember my face, Mama, Christy announced happily, because he said I look like his little girl. He said I was pretty. If he has such a pretty little girl, why doesn't he go back to her like a good father? Mrs. Johansson murmured, stroking Christy's cheek. Why doesn't he go back to his own country? Mama, is there anything to eat? Anne-Marie asked, hoping to take her mother's mind away from the soldiers. Take some bread and give a piece to your sister. With butter? Christy asked hopefully. No butter, her mother replied. You know that. Christy sighed as Anne-Marie went to the bread box in the kitchen. I wish I could have a cupcake, she said, a big yellow cupcake with pink frosting. Her mother laughed. For a little girl, you have a long memory, she told Christy. There hasn't been any butter or sugar for cupcakes in a long time, a year at least. When will there be cupcakes again? When the war ends, Mrs. Johansson said. She glanced through the window, down to the street corner where the soldiers stood, their faces impassive beneath the metal helmets. When the soldiers leave. And that is the end of chapter 1. I hope as I'm reading you have questions that come to mind, like, why don't they have coffee? Why don't they have tea? Why can't they make frosting and cupcakes and have sugar in the house? Maybe, hopefully, it's making you wonder what is going on in the world. What is the historical context behind this story? And that's something that we're going to discuss as we read too. Okay, chapter 2 is, Who is the Man Who Rides Past? Tell me a story, Anne-Marie, begged Christy as she snuggled beside her sister in the big bed they shared. Tell me a fairy tale. Anne-Marie smiled and wrapped her arms around her little sister in the dark. All Danish children grew up familiar with fairy tales. Hans Christian Andersen, the most famous of the tale tellers, had been Danish himself. Do you want the one about the Little Mermaid? That one always had been Anne-Marie's own favorite. But Christy said no. Tell one that starts with a king and a queen, and they have a beautiful daughter. All right. Once upon a time, there was a king, Anne-Marie began. And a queen, whispered Christy. Don't forget the queen. And a queen. And they lived together in a wonderful palace. And was the palace named Amaliaborg? Christy asked sleepily. Shh. Don't keep interrupting or I'll never finish the story. No, it wasn't Amalienborg. It was a pretend palace. Anne-Marie talked on, making up a story of a king and a queen and their beautiful daughter, Princess Kirsten. She sprinkled her tale with formal balls, fabulous gold-trimmed gowns, and feasts of pink-frosted cupcakes, until Christy's deep, even breathing told her that her sister was sound asleep. She stopped, waiting for a moment, half expecting Christy to murmur, "Then what happened?" But Christy was still. Anne-Marie's thoughts turned to the real king, Christian X, and the real palace, Amalienborg, where he lived in the center of Copenhagen. How the people of Denmark loved King Christian. He was not like the fairy tale kings who seemed to stand on balconies giving orders to subjects who sat on golden thrones demanding to be entertained and looking for suitable husbands for their daughters. King Christian was a real human being, a man with a serious, kind face. She had seen him often when she was younger. Each morning he had come from the palace on his horse Jubilee and ridden alone through the streets of Copenhagen, greeting his people. Sometimes when Anne-Marie was a little girl, her older sister Lise had taken her to stand on the sidewalk so that she could wave to King Christian. Sometimes he waved back to the two of them and smiled. "Now you are special forever," Lise told her once, "because you have been greeted by a king." Anne-Marie turned her head on the pillow and stared through the partly opened curtains of the window into the dim September night. Thinking of Lise, her solemn, lovely sister, always made her sad. So she turned her thoughts again to the king, who was still alive, and Lise was not. She remembered a story that Papa had told her. Shortly after the war began, shortly after Denmark had surrendered, and the soldiers had moved in overnight to take their places on the corners. One evening, Papa had told her that earlier he was on an errand near his office, standing on the corner waiting to cross the street, when King Christian came by on his morning ride. One of the German soldiers had turned suddenly and asked a question of a teenage boy nearby. "Who is the man who rides past here every morning on his horse?" the German soldier had asked. Papa said he had smiled to himself, amused that the German soldier did not know. He listened while the boy answered. "He is our king," the boy told the soldier. "He is the king of Denmark." "Where is his bodyguard?" the soldier had asked. "And do you know what the boy said?" Papa had asked Anne-Marie. She was sitting on his lap. She was little then, only 7 years old. She shook her head, waiting to hear the answer. The boy looked right at the soldier, and he said, "All of Denmark is his bodyguard." Anne-Marie had shivered. It sounded like a very brave answer. "Is it true, Papa?" she said. Is it true, Papa? She asked, what the boy said. Papa thought for a moment. He always considered questions very carefully before he answered them. "Yes," he said at last, "it is true. Any Danish citizen would die for King Christian to protect him." "You too, Papa?" "Yes." "And Mama?" "Mama too." Anne-Marie shivered again. "Then I would too, Papa, if I had to." They sat silently for a moment. From across the room, Mama watched them, Anne-Marie and Papa, and she smiled. Mama had been crocheting that evening 3 years ago, the lacy edging of a pillowcase, part of Lise's trousseau. Her fingers moved rapidly, turning the thin white thread into an intricate narrow border. Lise was a grown-up girl of 18 then, about to be married to Peter Nielsen. When Lise and Peter married, Mama said, Anne-Marie and Christy would have a brother for the very first time. "Papa," Anne-Marie had said, finally into the silence, "sometimes I wonder why the king wasn't able to protect us. Why didn't he fight the Nazis so that they wouldn't come to Denmark with their guns?" Papa sighed. "We are such a tiny country," he said, "and they are such an enormous enemy. Our king was wise. He knew how few soldiers Denmark had. He knew that many, many Danish people would die if we fought." "In Norway they fought," Anne-Marie pointed out. Papa nodded. "They fought very fiercely in Norway. They had those huge mountains and the Norwegian soldiers to hide in. Even so, Norway was crushed." In her mind, Anne-Marie had pictured Norway as she remembered it from the map at school, up above Denmark. Norway was pink on the school map. She imagined the pink strip of Norway crushed by a fist. "Are there German soldiers in Norway now, the same as here?" "Yes," Papa said. "In Holland, too," Mama added from across the room, "and Belgium and France." "But not in Sweden," Anne-Marie announced, proud that she knew so much about the world. Sweden was blue on the map, and she had seen Sweden, even though she had never been there. Standing behind Uncle Henrik's house, north of Copenhagen, she had looked across the water, the part of the North Sea that was called the Kattegat, to the land on the other side. "That is Sweden you are seeing," Uncle Henrik had told her. "You are looking across to another country." "That's true," Papa had said. "Sweden is still free." And now, 3 years later, it was still true. But much else had changed. King Christian was getting old, and he had been badly injured last year in a fall from his horse, faithful old Jubilee, who had carried him around Copenhagen for so many mornings. For days they thought he would die, and all of Denmark had mourned. But he hadn't. King Christian X was still alive. It was Lise who was not. It was her tall, beautiful sister who died in an accident 2 weeks before her wedding. In the blue carved trunk in the corner of this bedroom, Anne-Marie would see its shape even in the dark, were folded Lisa's pillowcases with their crocheted edges, her wedding dress with its hand-embroidered neckline, unworn, and the yellow dress she had worn and danced in, with its full skirt flying at the party celebrating her engagement to Peter. Mama and Papa never spoke of Lise. They never opened the trunk, but Anne-Marie did. from time to time when she was alone in the apartment. Alone, she touched Lisa's things gently, remembering her quiet, soft-spoken sister, who had looked forward so much to marriage and children of her own. Red-headed Peter, her sister's fiancé, had not married anyone in the years since Lisa's death. He had changed a great deal. Once he had been like a fun-loving older brother to Anne-Marie and Christy, teasing and tickling, always a source of foolishness and pranks. Now he still stopped by the apartment often, and his greetings to the girls were warm and smiling, but he was usually in a hurry, talking quickly to Mama and Papa about things Anne-Marie didn't understand. He no longer sang the nonsense songs that had once made Anne-Marie and Christy shriek with laughter, and he never lingered anymore. Papa had changed, too. He seemed much older and very tired, defeated. The whole world had changed. Only the fairy tales remained the same. And they lived happily ever after, Anne-Marie recited, whispering into the dark, completing the tale for her sister, who slept beside her, one thumb in her mouth. Okay. Chapter 3 is called, Where is Mrs. Hirsch? The days of September passed, one after the other, much the same. Anne-Marie and Ellen walked to school together and home again, always now taking the longer way, avoiding the tall soldier and his partner. Christy dawdled just behind them or scampered ahead, never out of their sight. The two mothers still had their coffee together in the afternoons. They began to knit mittens as the days grew slightly shorter and the first leaves began to fall from the trees, because another winter was coming. Everyone remembered the last one. There was no fuel now for the homes and apartments in Copenhagen, and the winter nights were terribly cold. Unlike the other families in their building, the Johansons had opened the old chimney and installed a little stove to use for heat when they could find coal to burn. Mama used it too, sometimes for cooking, because electricity was rationed now. At night they used candles for light. Sometimes Ellen's father, a teacher, complained in frustration because he couldn't see in the dim light to correct his students' papers. Soon we will have to add another blanket to your bed, Mama said in the morning as she and Anne-Marie tidied the bedroom. Christy and I are lucky to have each other for warmth in the winter, Anne-Marie said. Poor Ellen, to have no sisters. She will have to snuggle in with her Mama and Papa when it gets cold, Mama said, smiling. I remember when Christy slept between you and Papa. She was supposed to stay in her crib, but in the middle of the night she would climb out and get in with you, Anne-Marie said, smoothing the pillows on the bed. Then she hesitated and glanced at her mother, fearful that she had said the wrong thing, the thing that would bring the pained look to her mother's face. The days when little Christy slept in Mama and Papa's room were the days when Lise and Anne-Marie shared this bed. But Mama was laughing quietly. I remember too, she said. Sometimes she wet the bed in the middle of the night. I did not, Christy said haughtily from the bedroom doorway. I never, ever did that. Mama, still laughing, knelt and kissed Christy on the cheek. Time to leave for school, girls, she said. She began to button Christy's jacket. Oh dear, she said suddenly. Look, this button has broken right in half. Anne-Marie, take Christy with you after school to the little shop where Mrs. Hirsch sells thread and buttons. See if you can buy just one to match the others on her jacket. I'll give you some kroner. It shouldn't cost very much. But after school, when the girls stopped at the shop, which had been there as long as Anne-Marie could remember, they found it closed. There was a new padlock on the door and a sign, but the sign was in German and they couldn't read the words. I wonder if Mrs. Hirsch is sick, Anne-Marie said as they walked away. I saw her Saturday, Ellen said. She was with her husband and their son. They all looked just fine, or at least the parents looked just fine. The son always looks like a horror, she giggled. Anne-Marie made a face. The Hirsch family lived in the neighborhood, so they had seen the boy Samuel often. He was a tall teenager with thick glasses, stooped shoulders, and unruly hair. He rode a bicycle to school, leaning forward and squinting, wrinkling his nose to nudge his glasses into place. His bicycle had wooden wheels, now that the rubber tires weren't available, and it creaked and clattered in the street. I think the Hirsches all went on vacation to the seashore, Christy announced. And I suppose they took a big basket of pink frosted cupcakes with them, Anne-Marie said sarcastically to her sister. Yes, I suppose they did, Christy replied. Anne-Marie and Ellen exchanged looks that meant, ugh, Christy is so dumb. No one in Copenhagen had taken a vacation at the seashore since the war began. There were no pink frosted cupcakes. There hadn't been for months. Still, Christy thought, looking back at the shop before they turned the corner, where was Mrs. Hirsch? The Hirsch family had gone somewhere. Why else would they close the shop? Mama was troubled when she heard the news. Are you sure? She asked several times. We can find another button someplace, Anne-Marie reassured her, or we can take one from the bottom of the jacket and move it up. It won't show very much. But it didn't seem to be the jacket that worried Mama. Are you sure the sign was in German? She asked. Maybe you didn't look carefully. Mama, it had a swastika on it. Her mother turned away with a distracted look. Anne-Marie, watch your sister for a few moments and begin to peel the potatoes for dinner. I'll be right back. Where are you going? Anne-Marie asked her mother as she started for the door. I want to talk to Mrs. Rosen. Puzzled, Anne-Marie watched her mother leave the apartment. She went to the kitchen and opened the door to the cupboard where the potatoes were kept. Every night now, it seemed, they had potatoes for dinner and very little else. Anne-Marie was almost asleep when there was a light knock on the bedroom door. Candlelight appeared as the door opened and her mother stepped in. Are you sleeping, Anne-Marie? No, why? Is something wrong? Nothing's wrong, but I'd like you to get up and come out to the living room. Peter's here. Papa and I want to talk to you. Anne-Marie jumped out of bed, and Christy grunted in her sleep. Peter! She hadn't seen him in a long time. There was something frightening about his being here at night. Copenhagen had a curfew, and no citizens were allowed after 8 o'clock. It was very dangerous, she knew, for Peter to visit at this time, but she was delighted that he was here. Though his visits were always hurried, they almost seemed secret somehow, in a way she couldn't quite put her finger on. Still, it was a treat to see Peter. It brought back memories of happier times, and her parents loved Peter too. They said he was like a son. Barefoot, she ran into the living room and into Peter's arms. He grinned, kissed her cheek, and ruffled her long hair. You've grown taller since I last saw you, he told her. You're all legs. Anne-Marie laughed. I won the girls' foot race last Friday at school, she told him proudly. Where have you been? We've missed you. My work takes me all over, Peter explained. Look, I brought you something. One for Christy, too. He reached into his pocket and handed her 2 seashells. Anne-Marie put the smaller one on the table to save it for his sister. She held the other in her hands, turning it into the light, looking at the rigid, pearly surface. It was so like Peter to bring just the right gift. And for Mama and Papa, I brought something more practical. 2 bottles of beer. Mama and Papa smiled and raised their glasses. Papa took a sip and wiped the foam from his upper lips. Then his face became more serious. Anne-Marie, he said, Peter tells us the Germans have ordered the closing of many stores run by Jews. Jews? Anne-Marie repeated. Is Mrs. Hirsch Jewish? Is that why the button shop is closed? Why have they done that? Peter leaned forward. It's their way of tormenting. For some reason, they want to torment Jewish people. It has happened in other countries. They have taken their time here. They have let us relax a little, but now it seems to be starting. But why the button shop? What harm is a button shop? Mrs. Hurst is such a nice lady. Even Samuel, he's a dope, but he would never harm anyone. How could he? He can't even see with his thick glasses. Then Anne-Marie thought of something else. If they can't sell their buttons, how will they earn a living? Friends will take care of them, Mama said gently. That's what friends do. Anne-Marie nodded. Mama was right, of course. Friends and neighbors would go to the home of the Hirsch family, would take them fish and potatoes and bread and herbs for making tea. Maybe Peter would even take them a beer. They would be comfortable until their shop was allowed to open again. Then suddenly she sat upright, her eyes wide. Mama, she said, Papa, the Rosens are Jewish too. Her parents nodded, their faces serious and drawn. I talked to Sophie Rosen this afternoon after you told me about the button shop, Mama said. She knows what is happening, but she doesn't think it will affect them. Anne-Marie thought and understood. She relaxed. Mr. Rosen doesn't have a shop. He's a teacher. They can't close a whole school. She looked at Peter with the question in her eyes. Can they? I think the Rosens will be all right, he said, but you keep an eye on your friend Ellen and stay away from the soldiers. Your mother told me about what happened on Osterbrigade. Anne-Marie shrugged. She had almost forgotten the incident. It was nothing. They were only bored and looking for someone to talk to, I think. She turned to her father. Papa, do you remember what you heard the boy say to the soldier? That all of Denmark would be the king's bodyguard? Her father smiled. I have never forgotten it, he said. Well, Anne-Marie said slowly, now I think that all of Denmark must be the bodyguard for the Jews as well. So we shall be, Papa replied. Peter stood. I must go, he said. And you, long legs, it's way past your bedtime now. He hugged Anne-Marie again. Later, once more in her Once more in her bed beside the warm cocoon of her sister, Anne-Marie remembered how her father had said 3 years before that he would die to protect the king, that her mother would too. And Anne-Marie, 7 years old, had announced proudly that she would also. Now she was 10, with long legs and no more silly dreams of pink frosted cupcakes. And now she and all the Danes were to be the bodyguards for Ellen and Ellen's parents and all of Denmark's Jews. Would she die to protect them, truly? Anne-Marie was honest enough to admit there in the darkness to herself that she wasn't sure. For a moment she felt frightened, but she pulled the blanket up higher around her neck and relaxed. It was all imaginary anyway, not real. It was only in the fairy tales that people were called upon to be so brave, to die for one another, not in real-life Denmark. Oh, and there were the soldiers, that was true. And the courageous resistance leaders who sometimes lost their lives, that was true too. But ordinary people like the Rosens and the Johansons? Anne-Marie admitted to herself, snuggling there in the quiet dark, that she was glad to be an ordinary person who would never be called upon for courage. And that's the end of chapter 3. Interesting questions Anne-Marie is asking herself. She wants to say that she would be brave and that she'd be willing to die for her friend or for any other Jewish person in Denmark, but she's only 10 years old. That's a huge, humongous responsibility, don't you think? Okay, chapter 4. It's called It Will Be a Long Night. Before I begin, I wonder if you can think to yourself if you have any predictions based on the title, It Will Be a Long Night. Do you have any predictions what might happen in this chapter? Okay. Alone in the apartment, while Mama was out shopping with Christy, Anne-Marie and Ellen were sprawled on the living room floor playing with paper dolls. They had cut the dolls from Mama's magazines, old ones that she had saved from past years. The paper ladies had old-fashioned hairstyles and clothes, and the girls had given them names from Mama's very favorite book. Mama told Anne-Marie and Ellen the entire story of Gone with the Wind, and the girls thought it was much more interesting and romantic than the King and Queen tales that Christy loved. "Come, Melanie," Anne-Marie said, walking her doll across the edge of the rug. "Let's dress for the ball." "All right, Scarlett, I'm coming," Ellen replied in a sophisticated voice. She was a talented performer. She often played the leading roles in school dramatics. Games of the imagination were always fun when Ellen played. The door opened and Christy stomped in, her face tear-stained and glowering. Mama followed her with an exasperated look and set a package down on the table. "I won't," Christy sputtered. "I won't ever wear them. Not if you chain me in a prison and beat me with sticks." Oh, little siblings can be so dramatic. Anne-Marie giggled and looked questioningly at her mother, Mrs. Johansson. She sighed. "I bought Christy some new shoes," she explained. "She's outgrown her old ones." "Goodness, Christy," Ellen said. "I wish my mother would get me some new shoes. I love new things, and it's so hard to find them in stores." "Not if I go to the fish store," Christy bellowed. "But most mothers wouldn't take their daughters to wear ugly fish shoes." "Kristen," Mama said soothingly, "you know it wasn't a fish store, and we were lucky to find shoes at all." Christy sniffed. "Show them," she commanded. "Show Anne-Marie and Ellen how ugly they are." Mama opened the package and took out a pair of the little girl's shoes. She held them up and Christy looked away in disgust. "You know there's no leather anymore," Mama explained, "but they found a way to make shoes out of fish skin. I don't think these are too ugly." Anne-Marie and Ellen looked at the fish skin shoes. Anne-Marie took one in her hand and examined it. It was odd looking. The fish scales were visible, but it was a shoe and her sister needed shoes. "It's not so bad, Christy," she said, lying a little bit. Ellen turned the other one over in her hand. "You know," she said, "it's only the color that's ugly." "Green!" Christy wailed. I will never, ever wear green shoes." "In our apartment," Ellen told her, "my father has a jar of black ink. Would you like these shoes better if they were black?" Christy frowned. "Maybe I would," she said finally. "Well then," Ellen told her, "tonight, if your mama doesn't mind, I'll take the shoes home and ask my father to make them black for you with his ink." Mama laughed. "I think that would be a fine improvement. What do you think, Christy?" Christy pondered. "Could he make them shiny?" she asked. "I want them shiny." Ellen nodded. "I think he could. I think they'll be quite pretty, black and shiny." Christy nodded. "All right then," she said. "But you mustn't tell anyone that they're fish. I don't want anyone to know." She took her new shoes, holding them disdainfully, and put them on a chair. Then she looked with interest at the paper dolls. "Can I play too?" Christy asked. "Can I have a doll?" She squatted beside Anne-Marie and Ellen on the floor. Sometimes Anne-Marie thought Christy was such a pest, always butting in, but the apartment was small. There was no other place for Christy to play, and if they told her to go away, Mama would scold. "Here," Anne-Marie said. She handed her sister a cutout little girl doll. "We're playing Gone with the Wind. Melanie and Scarlett are going to the ball. You can be Bonnie. She's Scarlett's daughter." Christy danced her doll up and down happily. "I'm going to the ball," she announced in a high, pretend voice. Ellen giggled. "A little girl wouldn't go to the ball. Let's make them go someplace else. Let's make them go to Tivoli." "Tivoli?" Anne-Marie began to laugh. "That's in Copenhagen. Gone with the Wind is in America." "Tivoli, Tivoli, Tivoli," little Christy sang, twirling her doll in a circle. "It doesn't matter because it's only a game anyway," Ellen pointed out. "Tivoli can be there, by that chair." "Come on, Scarlett," she said, using her doll voice. "We shall go to Tivoli to dance and watch the fireworks, and maybe there will be some handsome men there. Bring your silly daughter Bonnie, and she can ride the carousel." Anne-Marie grinned and walked her Scarlett toward the chair that Ellen had designated as Tivoli. She loved Tivoli Gardens in the heart of Copenhagen. Her parents had taken her there often when she was a little girl. She remembered the music and the brightly colored lights, the carousel and the ice cream, and especially the magnificent fireworks in the evening, the huge colored splashes and bursts of light in the evening sky. "I remember the fireworks best of all," she commented to Ellen. "Me too," Christy said. "I remember the fireworks." "Silly," Anne-Marie scoffed. "You never saw the fireworks. Tivoli Gardens was closed now. The German occupation forces had burned part of it, perhaps as a way of punishing the fun-loving Danes for their light-hearted pleasures." Christy drew herself up, her small shoulders stiff. "I did too," she said belligerently. "It was my birthday. I woke up in the night and I could hear the booms, and there were lights in the sky. Mama said it was fireworks for my birthday." Then Anne-Marie remembered. Christy's birthday was late in August, and that night, only a month before, she too had been awakened and frightened by the sound of explosions. Christy was right. The sky in the southeast had been ablaze, and Mama had comforted her by calling it a birthday celebration. "Imagine such fireworks for a little girl 5 years old," Mama had said, standing on their bed, holding the dark curtain aside to look through the window at the lighted sky. The next evening's newspaper had told the sad truth. The Danes had destroyed their own naval fleet, blowing up the vessels one by one as the Germans approached to take over the ships for their own use. "How sad the king must be," Anne-Marie had heard Mama say to Papa when they read the news. "How proud," Papa had replied. It made Anne-Marie feel sad and proud, too, to picture the tall, aging king, perhaps with tears in his blue eyes, as he looked at the remains of his small navy, which now lay submerged and broken in the harbor. "I don't want to play anymore, Ellen," she said suddenly, and put her paper doll on the table. "I have to go home anyway," Ellen said. "I have to help Mama with the house cleaning. Thursday is our New Year. Did you know that?" "Why is it yours?" asked Christy. "Isn't it our New Year's too?" "No, it's the Jewish New Year. That's just for us. But if you want, Christy, you can come that night and watch Mama light the candles." Anne-Marie and Christy had often been invited to watch Mrs. Rosen light the Sabbath candles on Friday evenings. She covered her head with a cloth and said a special prayer in Hebrew as she did so. Anne-Marie always stood very quietly, awed to watch. Even Christy, usually such a chatterbox, was always still at that time. They didn't understand the words or the meaning, but they could feel what a special time it was for the Rosens. "Yes," Christy agreed happily. "I'll come and watch your Mama light the candles, and I'll wear my new black shoes." But this time was to be different. Leaving for school on Thursday with her sister, Anne-Marie saw the Rosens walking into the synagogue early in the morning, dressed in their best clothes. She waved to Ellen, who waved happily back. "Lucky Ellen," Anne-Marie said to Christy. "She doesn't have to go to school today." "But she probably has to sit very still, like we do in church," Christy pointed out, "and that's no fun." That afternoon, Mrs. Rosen knocked at their door, but didn't come inside. Instead, she spoke for a long time in a hurried, tense voice to Anne-Marie's mother in the hall. When Mama returned, her face was worried, but her voice was cheerful. "Girls," she said, "we have a nice surprise. Tonight, Ellen will be coming to stay overnight and be our guest for a few days. It isn't often we have a visitor." Christy clapped her hands in delight. But Mama, Anne-Marie said in dismay, it's their new year. They were going to have a celebration at home. Ellen told me that her mother managed to get a chicken someplace, and she was going to roast it. Their first roast chicken in a year or more. Their plans have changed, Mama said briskly. Mr. and Mrs. Rosen have been called away to visit some relatives, so Ellen will stay with us. Now let's get busy and put clean sheets on your bed, Christy. You may sleep with Mama and Papa tonight, and we'll let the big girls giggle together by themselves. Christy pouted, but it was clear she was about to argue. Mama will tell you a special story tonight, her mother said, one just for you. About a king? Christy asked dubiously. About a king, if you wish, Mama replied. All right then, but there must be a queen too, Christy said. Though Mrs. Rosen had sent her chicken to the Johansons, and Mama made a lovely large dinner, large enough for second helpings all around, it was not an evening of laughter and talk. Ellen was silent at dinner. She looked frightened. Mama and Papa tried to speak of cheerful things, but it was clear that they were worried, and it made Anne-Marie worried too. Only Christy was unaware of the quiet tension in the room, swinging her feet in their newly blackened and shiny shoes. She chattered and giggled during dinner. Early bedtime tonight, little one, Mama announced after the dishes were washed. We need extra time for that long story I promised about the king and queen. She disappeared with Christy into the bedroom. What's happening? Anne-Marie asked when she and Ellen were alone, and Papa was in the living room. Something's wrong. What is it? Papa's face was troubled. I wish I could protect you children from this knowledge, he said quietly. Ellen, you already know. Now we must tell Anne-Marie. He turned to her and stroked her hair with his gentle hand. This morning at the synagogue, the rabbi told his congregation that the Nazis have taken the synagogue list of all the Jews, where they live, what their names are. Of course, the Rosens were on that list along with many others. Why? Why do they want those names? They plan to arrest all the Danish Jews. They plan to take them away, and we have been told that they may come tonight. I don't understand. Take them where? Her father shook his head. We don't know where, and we don't really know why. They call it relocation. We don't even really know what that means. We only know that it is wrong, and it is dangerous, and we must help. Anne-Marie was stunned. She looked at Ellen and saw that her best friend was crying silently. Where are Ellen's parents? We must help them too. We couldn't take all three of them. If the Germans came to search our apartment, it would be clear that the Rosens were here. One person we can hide, not three. So Peter has helped Ellen's parents go somewhere else. We don't know where. Ellen doesn't know either, but they are safe. Ellen sobbed aloud and put her face in her hands. Papa put his arms around her. They are safe, Ellen, I promise you that. You will see them again quite soon. Can you try to believe my promise? Ellen hesitated, nodded, and wiped her eyes with her hand. But Papa, Anne-Marie said, looking around the small apartment with its few pieces of furniture, the fat stuffed sofa, the table and chairs, the small bookcase against the wall. You said we would hide her. How can we do that? Where can she hide? Papa smiled. That part is easy. It will be as your mama said. You two will sleep together in your bed, and you may giggle and talk and tell secrets to each other, and if anyone comes, Ellen interrupted him. Who might come? Will it be soldiers, like the ones on the corners? Anne-Marie remembered how terrified Ellen had looked the day when the soldiers questioned them on the corner. I really don't think anyone will, but it never hurts to be prepared. If anyone should come, even soldiers, you two will be sisters. You are together so much it will be easy for you to pretend you are sisters. He rose and walked to the window. He pulled the lace curtain aside and looked down into the street. Outside it was beginning to grow dark. Soon they would have to draw the black curtains so all the Danes had on their windows. The entire city had become completely darkened at night. In a nearby tree a bird was singing. Otherwise it was quiet. It was the last night of September. Go now and get on your nightgowns. It will be a long night. Anne-Marie and Ellen got to their feet. Papa suddenly crossed the room and put his arms around them both. He kissed the tops of each head, Anne-Marie's blonde one, which reached to his shoulders, and Ellen's dark hair, the thick curls braided, as always, into pigtails. Don't be frightened, he said to them softly. Once I had 3 daughters. Tonight I am proud to have 3 daughters again. And that is the end of the chapter. We're going to stop here for today, but we will talk very soon about some questions that we have about this book, some predictions we have. You guys will get a short writing response assignment in reflection to this reading. So we'll talk to you soon. Bye.